The second video lesson regards a room of one's own. Like we said, it is published in 1929. In A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf states right at the beginning, a woman must have money and a room of her own if she wants to write fiction. Woolf here begins by stating material facts and issues to counteract the assumption the women's literary production has been for so long inferior in quality to men's. The essay has a rather unusual structure that turns out to be quite effective in outlining the hardships that women have always had to face during the creativity process. Daily issues, even petty ones that indeed affected their capability to focus on their work and even the chance to believe in themselves and their talent, so as to build up a thorough and lasting self-confidence, essential qualities to pursue in their efforts. Jane Austen, for instance, was known to hide away her writings when servants came in the sitting room where she regularly worked. All the female writers of those times were forced to publish under pseudonyms because they couldn't reveal their female identities, or publishers would have refused to publish their works. In fact, she says, unlike their male counterparts, women have always been burdened with household duties that inevitably imprison them in repetitive, boring, tiring, and time-consuming daily routines that deprived them of the vital time and private space that were and still are crucial for any creative ambition they might have had. We may be tempted to take all this for granted, given the enormous changes that we can enjoy today. However, these words and the concept they conveyed were radically revolutionary in 1928, a time during which women were still legally and financially depending on their husbands. Women historically have been denied those luxuries that were considered perfectly natural to men. First of all, education, she says, and in a fictitious tour of men's university, she begins to describe the opulence of the buildings, the incredible number of books in their libraries, the beauty of study rooms and campuses, and she reports being stopped by a custodian from stepping on the grass because she is a woman, and only men are allowed to walk or sit on the grass, just as she is denied access to the library for the same reason. She must not wander off the gravel path. Therefore emphasizing that for the mere fact of being a woman, she could not do as she pleased, like men could, but she had to keep to the rules set for women by men. That is precisely why she underlines the need for women to be financially independent and self-sufficient, and to have their own private space where to find the proper concentration without useless interruptions that result in inevitably fragmented production. She continues by relating that men's universities have been lavishly funded by generous patrons who held young men's education in great esteem, whereas the women's college she visited on the same occasion showed clear signs of much less importance, and to do so she listed the menu of the lunches served on the same day in the men's college and in the women's, describing in detail the great differences between the two. In fact, if the former has the best dishes and the best wines, the latter is not even half as plentiful or savory. On the contrary, it is quite plain. This merely to show that there is much less interest in women's education, therefore the funding is always lacking. However, she adds, had women been taught to make money and make the best of their talents and creativity, they probably would have stopped having children. The metaphor is meant to underline that women have always had less opportunities than men in enjoying the proper financial status and the adequate free time to let loose their imagination, to enrich their knowledge, and thus to produce as well. In chapter 2, she writes, one must strain off what personal and accidental in all these impressions, and so reach the pure, fluid, the essential oil of truth. Women have been regularly told to be inadequate, inferior, incapable of genius, and in the long run, they ended up believing so themselves. Circumstances and conditions, all external, contributed to discourage them and made them vulnerable to others. Oppression, moreover, comes from within as well as from without. It is internalized. In other words, in her effort to get at the truth, she realizes that that's quite impossible, because, she continues, we are all imbued with our own experience of life. We are permeated by historical events, molded by family background, and all this concurs in the perception that we have of ourselves, of others, and whatever is around us. There is no escape from the perception of reality that influences our opinion. That is why, she tells her audience, there is not one given truth, and everything depends on everything else. And it is the same for women's literary endeavors, which are a sum of their entire lives and their personality too. To make this clearer, she underlines that it would have been impossible, completely and entirely, for any woman to have written the plays of Shakespeare in the age of Shakespeare. Again, she resorts to fiction to illustrate exactly what she is thinking, and she invents a fictitious twin sister of the famous poet, Judith Shakespeare. Had she existed, continues Woolf, she would have had a tragic fate, no doubt. Judith Shakespeare's fate, had she really existed, would have been totally different than that of her famous twin brother William. Genius is not born among laboring, uneducated, servile people. Genius engendered witches and lunatics among women at the time. So Judith Shakespeare, endowed with the same visionary poetic talent as her brother, conventions and female duties would have undoubtedly played against her. At one point of her life, she would have been forced to marry a spouse of her father's choice, and as she rebelled against this decision, she would have been beaten to curb her spirit and silence her protests. And even if she had run away and actually reached London, just as her twin brother had, she would never have been allowed to become an actress. On the contrary, she would have been taken advantage of, abused of. She would have gotten pregnant and fallen in total disgrace. She would have committed suicide. Virginia Woolf takes the most common idea, according to which the lacking quality of women's writing proves their inferiority compared to men, but she uses a completely different approach to invalidate this assumption. In fact, she analyzes the historical context and discovers that the way women are judged and treated sets a completely unequal ground and virtually decrees the impossibility for women to realistically rival men in their literary achievements. The circumstances in which Judith Shakespeare is forced to live prove that it's not a matter of talent or intellectual ability. It is indeed her sex that prevents her to reach any artistic fulfillment. To support her thesis, Woolf goes one step further. Life for both sexes, and I took it then, shouldering their way along the pavement, is arduous, difficult, a perpetual struggle. It calls for gigantic courage and strength. More than anything, perhaps, creatures of illusion that we are, it calls for the confidence in oneself. This statement underlines the fact that the way men have treated women has always been unequal. In fact, she believes the men have systematically subordinated women to reinforce their own confidence as the more capable sex. But that's quite understanding, she says, and she highlights the great importance of the quest of confidence. It is essential to possess it if one wants to pursue art. Women have so far lacked confidence, and that is why the quality of their art is not as good as it can be. They lack confidence, and they are full of anger for their condition of second-rate citizens, and it shows in their writing. Their resentment and rancor comes off. Yet, despite all that they keep that they keep going, they persist, and just for that, she deems them heroic. Economic freedom is essential to art. Unequal treatment of women should not be blamed on men who try to build their self-confidence by subordinating women to their needs. This is a mirrored effect that causes anger and frustration in women, and it shows in their writing. Jane Austen's writing doesn't bear any bitterness, but Charlotte Bronte's instead does. She had personal scars that protruded in her writing.